the city is an entertainment machine, and scenescapes. Okay, so we have two, three, four big ideas, and those are what I want to stress today in this PowerPoint. And you can read the specifics in the books. So the first big idea is that of a scene. What's a scene? A scene is not a social class like the bourgeoisie. It's not a primordial, that is a bourgeoisie as well. You're born into a social class by virtue of your father's or your parents' occupation and income. So in that sense, you cannot control at least where you were born. The second, and so that in that sense we call it primordial, in that you can't control it. Even if it's not biological, it's where you were born. Second, race, ethnicity, you cannot control. Third, gender, you can control a little. A few people are doing these days, but in general, no. National origin, ethnicity overlaps with race. And religion then is sometimes included. Most people don't change their religions, but you can. So in that sense, religion is not really primordial to the same degree as the others. But what all these share, these are standard social characteristics that sociologists, the media, general political commentators have used for voting groups and public policy recipient groups for years. Our point is, these are out of date. If you only use these, that is, these explain less and less. These explain about, if you take all these five, you explain about 15% of many of the important things for public policy and service delivery. Satisfaction with hospitals in China, I would bet, are similar. That is, who is satisfied with hospitals, who goes to the hospital, how often do you see a doctor? Those kinds of questions are explained. 15% of the variation is explained by race, class, gender, national origin, and so forth. 85% is not explained by these characteristics. So what we need are some new concepts, or some new ideas, some new dynamics about why people go to the hospital, why they fight with the police, why they go to church, why they paint or don't, why they read a book or not, whether they shop, how often you shop a year. These kinds of behavioral activities that people do, normal people do all the time in life, civic, political, social, whatever, the dynamics of cities and countries are changing. And those, the big things I put on the board are the big dates of 1968, 1989, which have been fundamental in exacerbating changes that go back for centuries. Egalitarianism, individualism, so forth, which we've talked about and we'll continue to. But we can find that, but they're not uniform in the entire world. Countries differ, cities differ, families differ. So we've got what social scientists like, variation. So we can analyze, why do people and services and policies vary? What do they vary with? How can we explain them? How do they work, and why do they work that way? And we don't just need history, we can often use variations at the same point in time. Okay. But we also need we need to think, or maybe there's some new concepts, some new things in people's heads. Okay, with the decline of these primordial, and related with what, say, in Asia people talk about as Western individualism, although individualism also has an Asian tradition. As individualism generally rises, as egalitarianism generally rises, and egalitarianism is very strong in China. It's a subculture within the West, and it gets fought over sometimes by political parties and political campaigns and so forth. But as these big changes are happening, new concepts come in, like scenes, is what we're suggesting. So I'm going to just start with a very quick listing of these. Then we'll go into the background and we'll come into more specifics. But what's the idea of a scene? It's a neighborhood, like a little area. It has physical structures, people labeled in traditional categories as well as some new ones, and then combinations of the above, like attending a concert which join them. So that is, because you're a Madonna fan or a Beatles fan in the past, or a fan of a particular kind of music, you may be distinctive in ways that may be more important for ticket sales or some other things than whether you're black, white, old, young, woman or man, and so forth. So knowing things like what kind of music you like, what kind of shoes do you like. I mean, teenagers, look at what teenagers are focusing on. They're using their iPhones, their iPads, they're shopping for shoes, for skirts, for scarves, for glasses, and new kinds of things which are defining. That is, there's just one example. The Ray School right here in Hyde Park is a public school. It has a mixture of the many ethnic, religious, minority, educational groups in the whole city. It has a fair number of African Americans, but it's also got children of academics, Hyde Park attorneys, and so forth. And the kids on the playground, that is, you might expect, this is Chicago. Chicago is based on ethnic politics. You might think on the playground at lunch and in recesses or whatever, breaks, that the kids from the Ray School would divide up by black and white, rich and poor, and so forth, as many of the social standard theories would suggest. Well, how do they divide up, at least when there was a BA done by a student who went to the playground and watched and talked to the kids and said, which group are you in and why? How do you get together? What makes you different from the others? What did they say? Whoops. What happened there? Okay, so let's shut itself up. What did they say?
Interests.
That's a good beginning. What more? Another guess, a little more specific? Designer labels. They had the Gap group versus Nike versus others based on the label of the clothes. That's how they divided up. And maybe it was deliberately chosen so they would avoid being race, class, gender. We don't know for sure. But the point is, don't assume that is a designer label, in a sense, is what can join people in a scene like a luncheon break on a playground. You can move in with one group or you can walk to another one. It's not based on your parents, it's based on your choice there. And they can create a new group. So maybe that you can have Gap 1 and Gap 2, or Gap Women, Gap Men, something like that. But the point is, the scene idea permits more choice by you as an individual. And in that sense, it's recognizing the way of implementing and capturing a new kind of dynamic, which is enhanced by social media, by iPhones, by choice, and of course by underlying drivers like more education, income, occupation, travel, looking at videos, having more of a cosmopolitan sense that, I could be either in Gap 1 or Gap 2. I can choose. I got a new outfit. I don't want to be with those old Gap people. I want to start a new group. Something like that. That's happening. Okay. So how do we capture this? Let's start thinking about a new, and so there are many things are possible, but what we do here in the book on Scenescapes is think about scenes as a new concept, not just for playgrounds, but for social scientists, to think about analyzing how do people do what they do, not just on one playground, but in China, in France, and so forth. Okay. Downloading music. Are you a fan of this or that singer? That's very big stuff. Okay, we can try to capture that. All right. We need to change something here a little bit. How do I make this? Okay, pull this down. All right, that may be just enough. These are our 15 scenes dimensions on the bottom. Transgression, self-expression, charisma, utilitarianism, egalitarianism. That's traditionalism. Okay, over here we've got neighborliness, transgression, exhibitionism, glamour, formal, local, ethnic, state, corporate, and rational. Those are the 15 key dimensions of scenes, grouped under these headings. And they're the core of the book. That is that notice that these are not as specific as Chicago or China, but they're not totally abstract in saying everybody wants to maximize their income or everybody wants to maximize their utility. They're more specific than income, but they're not as specific as Gap versus Levi Strauss. That is, they're intermediary concepts, and they're chosen based on a long review of concepts around the world, not to be American, not to be Western, but to also include Asia, China, Africa, Latin America, in ways what makes Beijing specific. We can say, let's study Beijing based on its specific, and we'll get to this in a minute, combination of these 15. That's a way of trying to say, what is Beijing, and how does Beijing work, that can be partially compared with Paris, partially compared with San Francisco, and so forth. All right. But these are the big ideas. Okay. Here's another big idea. Robert Putnam, famous book, Bowling Alone. People are no longer joining organizations as much as they did in the past, especially, let's say, primordial or like African American organizations or ethnic organizations. Lions clubs are going down. In Europe, religion has gone way down. U.S. is still a relatively religious country, like Poland and Ireland, but in Asia, religion is much more loose and less actively participatory. But the main point is recent change, especially in the U.S. in Putnam's study, but also he has a second book on international comparisons, and he basically has a fair amount of data that people are generally joining many organizations less. Okay, and as the book Kentuckville Karaoke, which we went over a little bit last time, suggests, for Putnam at least, this says this is a crisis for democracy. It's a crisis for legitimacy. Because if people don't join organizations, they will be anomic, individualistic, they'll be grabby, they won't learn how to work with others in a civilized way, and it can create a major political crisis. Okay. We took Putnam's data. We reanalyzed it because he'd analyzed most of the organizations, putting them all together. Religious, political, unions, neighborhood, alumni, and so forth. We broke them apart into separate types of organizations and found unions are going down. Neighborhood associations are going down. Many are in decline. However, here is the big exception. Arts and culture. Also, education was included, but when we tried to do other measures without education, the driver is arts and culture. Doubling in the U.S. in membership. This is a question which just says, which of the following organizations are you a member of? And there's a list of 25 kinds of organizations, and this is just one of them. So fewer people say they belong to organizations in many, many types, but they do say, hey, the arts. That's new, and most people don't know this, including people in the arts. They think, oh no, the symphony, the opera is going down. People don't want to come to music anymore. We have a crisis. Okay. So the point is, no. If you ask citizens, are you a member of any kind of music, arts, culture organization? They say yes, even if they don't buy season's tickets to the Chicago Symphony. They may be members of a self-created rock band that doesn't have a 501c3 number, has no phone number, no yellow page listing, but it's an organization that they belong to. They check yes. So there are lots of little organizations, volatile organizations, self-created by young people organizations, and they are very dynamic. The Netherlands went up 30%. Sorry, three. Yeah. I think it's isn't it 300%? Yeah, went from 12% to 45%. In the U.S., it went from from 12 or something to 36%. That's a 300% increase in 20 years. That's massive. There are very few changes in social science that big. Okay, so there's a huge rise in the arts that most people don't pay attention to. But it's not just in the traditional arts. It's often new kinds of downloading social media, downloading music in your own iPhone. That might be part of that. Okay, so we've got lots of arts roads. So this finding, this dynamite finding, we said, hey, nobody said this. Let's explore this. We've been exploring this now for 12 years. Okay, in 12 years we found a lot of interesting things that nobody else was basically working on. So if we looked at arts jobs versus arts establishments. We find big rise in this is now census data. This is not questions of individual citizens. It's really census data. What kinds of arts jobs are there? Promoters of performing arts, sports, and similar activities. Fine arts schools, other specialized design services, independent artists, writers, and performers, sports teams and clubs, zoos and botanical gardens, food service contractors. These are all booming. Other things are in decline down here, such as book printing or bookstores are in decline. So some of the traditional institutions in the arts are going down, but others are coming up. Okay, so this book, we explored that especially with Asians. This is mostly with Asians because the big theory that innovation drives the economy, one, and two, participation builds democracy and civility, second, failed in Asia. So we wanted to say, why? What's different in Asia? And that's what I talked about a little bit last time. And I'll bring in just 1 or 2 points from that this time. Another related concept related to the arts. Okay, this is Arts Buzz. Basically, the things everybody knows about are the traditional arenas in industry, industrial clusters, where people join together based on their work, the products, the producer, so forth. The residential neighborhoods you all know about, Hyde Park. Political arenas you know about because of citizen-led initiatives. They may be politically organized. And the resources, respectively, are power, money, and trust. Okay, what we're adding is the cultural scene, which is an important addition to these. Not to say these go away, we need all of these. But the point is, this is being added with the scenes idea. That this is expressive and communicative feelings, experiences, and moods. The agents are consumers, not residents or producers. And they value and they're driven by amenities, such as wanting to live in Chicago rather than in North Dakota. And lifestyle sensibilities rather than just having a job. You want to have a job, but you want a job that you like, in a place that you like, with people and amenities that you like. And the symbolic resource is buzz. Okay. Hey, this is exciting. Buzzy. Let's go to that restaurant. She's a hot singer. I want to hear her tonight. Okay. That kind of phenomenon has become more important. And then people over here, like Bill Clinton, who would play the trombone, would try to capture. And then he would go to Hollywood and have photographs taken with the Hollywood stars, or bring the sports teams to the White House. The political leaders are trying to exchange some of the buzz, some of these resources, as the smarter political leaders recognize, hey, this has got a lot of potential, such as tweets, okay? We can at least abstractly classify types of political systems as being dominant. These are ideal types up at the top. Business dominant, culturally dominant. And then say the resources vary in what's important. That is, if you've got a traditional business dominant political system, money is what counts. That's the big driver. Aesthetic buzz is low, at least in that simple old-fashioned business manner. But if we've got these culturally dominant things, then buzz is really what drives it. And that is, if you're a Lollapalooza organizer, that's what you want. You want the buzz from Lollapalooza. Okay. But the point is, if you're a smart political leader, as Daley too was, and as Rahm Emanuel is, you want both. You want the money, you want the votes, and you want to use the buzz to get you the money and the votes so that you can have tourists. That is what Rahm Emanuel had a story in Crane, Chicago. We're counting the number of tourists. Why are tourists beautiful for a mayor? They bring their money, they like it, they're attracted voluntarily. They like the Gap in Chicago, they like the Lollapalooza, they'll pay sales taxes when they buy there and in the restaurants and in the hotels, but that means if they pay sales taxes there, the taxpayers of Chicago don't pay as much. So you reduce local taxes, you increase local revenues, you get more services for the visitors as well as the permanent residents, and buzz is a multi-million, billion-dollar dynamic if you handle it right. And Rahm Emanuel is openly, explicitly following this, as did Daley, but Rahm Emanuel is just going further. Okay. What are the biggest convention cities in the U.S.? Las Vegas, Disney in Florida, the two Disney locations in Anaheim and Florida. Third is Chicago. New York, I think, is 17th. Business convention people do not go to New York. Okay? That, if you can bring the business convention people and they bring their children, their friends, their spouses, and they stay a few more days, that's hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue which the taxpayers don't have to pay. So from a standpoint of a mayor, hey, you can build roads, fix the potholes, pay the union wages, and lower taxes. Okay. So if we look at one of the most widespread concepts from Jane Jacobs and from others, Bohemia drives development. Concepts become central in a lot of work on amenities as well as for urban growth in post-industrial society. How can we measure, how can we conceptualize and then measure a Bohemian scene? We had our bike tour went through Bridgeport. Why is Bridgeport famous to most people here and around the world?
Music?
The neighborhood of Bridgeport in Chicago.
Oh, Bridgeport. Wait, slap.
You were on the bike ride. What did you heard? What did we say?
The mayor lives there?
The mayor lives there. Daley. Mayor Daley 1. Mayor Daley 2. We stopped in front of their house. There's now a third or fourth generation of Daley living in the same modest little house. Okay. Not only did the mayor live there, this is the center of Irish and Catholic political power and the Democratic Party machine organization in the entire county. It's the neighborhood of blue-collar, traditional, working-class politics. Okay, what's the news? When we created Bohemian scores, we found Bridgeport was pretty high. Wow! So I went biking again. I mean, we had the bike ride. I went biking again yesterday around Bridgeport. And it's got tattoo parlors. It's got art galleries. It's got cafes. It's got Mexican taco outdoor cafes. They weren't there 3 months ago. Outdoor, cafe-like, fancy little awnings, music, taco bar. Okay? So the point is, these are scenes. These are new kinds of scenes that appeal to different tastes. You don't need to be Mexican to go to the taco bar. You could be Irish, but maybe you like it. Okay. These are redefining. So there's a great student paper by one guy who lived in Bridgeport all his life, and a second guy who was an anthropologist and editor of newspaper here, Arrigo and Thompson, and it's called Blue Collar Bobo, and how the concept of Bobo from the New York Times got transformed in Bridgeport in this way by 3 massive arts organizations. They're huge old industrial buildings that have been taken over by there were 2 very smart Chinese who came to Chicago and said, we want to have a big place. They were artists. We want a big place for art. And they were artists with some money. and so they bought a huge building in a cheap neighborhood. They thought, we just want a cheap building in a cheap neighborhood. They bought it, but they had a couple of political problems, but it's nevertheless there. They now give tours. It's called Xiao B, the Xiao Brothers. The second one the city has. And it's a massive building. It's got all kinds of stuff going on the weekend, Saturday afternoon, Sunday afternoon, etc. Third, there's the Lumpen Arts Group. These are 3 very active arts groups of people who are bohemian, and they're transforming Bridgeport. Question, comment?
Oh yeah. Like as we talk about like gentrification in this class, like I'm just reminded. So you think of like Bushwick, like most of these places are like cheap rent, which is when a lot of like artists move there. Like that's what I saw happen in like Brooklyn and New York. But Bridgeport is kind of different because I feel like it has like a huge like Irish American, Chinese American community.
So does Bridgeport.
Oh, sorry, I meant Bridgeport.
Okay.
And then Bushwick is just like for like Black residents. So it's like just like the different effects of like I guess it is gentrification on these 2 communities. It's just interesting.
No, but you're on to the bait. What you're talking about is perfectly linked to the general idea of scenes. To start with the names like Bridgeport and Bushwick, and then to say, what are their specific components? What makes them different? What do they share or what are they different on? And by comparing those dimensions in that way, you can begin to generalize about why or how is Bridgeport different from Hyde Park or Bronzeville. Yeah.
Is this like can this be a cyclical process as artists move in and make, change these neighborhoods, and then it becomes too expensive, and then artists move elsewhere and transform other neighborhoods?
Yes, and that's the classic gentrification story. And I would say it's partially right, but it's very simple and incomplete. So I'm working with several students doing PhD. Well, Whitney Johnson, who was our second teaching assistant, did her MA on exactly that topic. And she compared Brooklyn and New York, Wicker Park, and a couple of other of the major examples, and then the main theories. But she's trying to build a better theory, and there are now other people doing PhDs continuing that effort. So she'll be here. We're going to talk more about the arts on Wednesday and later on. So think of a few questions and let's ask her to explore them. Okay, so this is one example that we can, the numbers are small, but the idea is if you take the 15 scenes dimensions, you can say Bohemia is defined by high scores on some and low scores on others. just as you discussed, say, Bushwick versus Bridgeport. And so transgression is high, that's number 5. And self-expression are both the highest on here. So transgressive, self-expressive people are bohemian. On other things like tradition and utilitarianism, they're low. That's the definition of Bohemia, basically, which comes from Balzac, from Baudelaire, Greenwich Village, and the like. Okay. Examples. Critical mass in San Francisco and in Chicago. This is a group, who's ever written in with critical mass can describe it briefly? Nobody? Have you heard of it? You know what? Okay, tell us what it is, even if you haven't written with it. You shook your head. Do you have a little?
I don't know that much about it to describe it, other than it's a bunch of people like do these big rides through cities.
Okay, they do big rides, but are they racing tough cyclists? No.
No, they're artsy.
They're called critical mass. They're critical of the political and economic establishment. And they sometimes stop traffic deliberately in front of some place they want to protest. They play music which is punk and so forth music. They ride slowly. They talk to each other. They wave to all the pedestrians as they pass. They say, "Happy Friday." They ride once a month on Friday nights in about 80 cities across the U.S. and the world. And they're a concrete example of anybody who wants to show up with a rental bike or whatever can join. So you don't need to be black or white or whatever. But it's a politically, socially defined kind of grouping which illustrates these new organizations and that can change a scene. That is, they completely change the scene of a city street when they're biking there deliberately. Okay, so this is I'm getting stuff. Here we go. Here's a size. That's what I was looking for. Okay, so I can make this. All right. This is a little different from what but basically, without going into detail, but we can have income, education, occupation, then we can add a bohemianism score for a neighborhood and say, how might this change things like transit ridership or the non-automobile journey to work? This is from a PhD by Hee-Sun Jeong, and she found that in France, in the US, and Korea, in all 3 countries, bohemianism transformed the effects of the more standard social characteristics. Okay. It fits the theory. This is from Christina Sakamoto. Which comes first, jobs or arts? Traditional answer is jobs drive everything. Let's look. And one way of testing this is to say, if you have data on the number of arts jobs over time, year by year by year by year, and you have the number of total jobs and arts jobs, and then you compare their relative growth and see which grows faster and which grows first. Then if you do this for 45,000 zip codes in the US, you've got lots of variation in the relative growth rate of arts jobs and total jobs. Then you can look at the relative magnitude of those 2 yellow paths. I'm not trying to go into detail, except simply to say the ideas are the core ideas. I'm saying you need to have no requirement in any statistics or whatever to understand this. The core ideas are simple, which I'm giving you now. And this is too small. Okay.
Do you want it to be in presentation mode, so it's as large as it can be, or?
I'm ambivalent because in the past they used to lock up when I would do that, so I'm
Okay.
afraid to press that button.
Sure. Okay.
Often it now works because they've upgraded the operating system, but I'm still button shy. I'm shy using the button because I don't want the whole thing to blow up. Okay, I'm going to stay away from that. This is the bottom line of the story, which I want to show here. Which comes first, the arts job or the non-arts job? It depends on where you live in the U.S. If you live in the blue area, total jobs are more important than arts jobs. If you live in the red areas, arts jobs are more important. So if you live in New York or LA or San Francisco, if you're in the film industry, you can understand, obviously, the film industry is a major driver and it's arts in the general sense. So if the film industry grows, so do all the jobs in Southern California. In the book industry, in the publishing industry, in art museums, as well as if you create your own band in LA, Chicago, or New York, and there are more of these have side effects, tertiary multiplier effects, and they create more jobs of all kinds. And so the question, so clearly we have both going on, all different kinds of jobs create each other, but which is more important if we just try to simplify into arts versus non-arts? And the answer is, in the blue areas, total jobs are more important. In the red areas, the art jobs are distinctive drivers. And they make the whole economy hum. That's why we call it the city is an entertainment machine. The city is an entertainment machine in these red areas, visibly. And that's what Rahm Emanuel is doing with a vengeance. And Daley started it, and so forth, and Jane Byrne before. Okay. But again, this also makes another big point. Don't feel you have to fight with your roommates or your grandmother over why are people racist or not, what leads them to say hello or not to say hello in the street. That is, it may be that they're different kinds of people, different kinds of cities, different kinds of neighborhoods, and this is a way of answering a question that is not a dichotomous yes or no universally or for the whole U.S., that there are differences by sub-regions, subtypes. Okay. A political version of this we're pursuing with 6 college students, all majoring in political science, all going to law school, and we're analyzing Trump scenes. And we've got 6 different kinds of Trump scenes because the media all talk about the Trump scene or the Trump base, and it's sort of a less educated West Virginia kind of location. But if you look at the exit polls, 53% of white American women voted for Donald Trump. 53%. They don't all live and act as if they're West Virginia unemployed men in the coal industry. They're women, they're white women everywhere. So there are different kinds of Trump scenes. That's the idea. We want to look at these different scenes and see how they operate in terms of civic, political, other kinds of decisions. Okay. This is the bigger picture which we saw with the book, The New Political Culture. This is the core. I didn't want to bring in a PowerPoint that one day, but this is one of the key figures in 6, 7 books on the new political culture. That is, we have economic, social, and cultural factors which transform and increase this new political culture. Government here, 1, 2, so 4. Government, culture, social, economic. And in all of these, what I talked about was hierarchy. Hierarchy is declining. And as hierarchy declines, that's the general idea in many of these, then you have things like the paternalistic style of the family declines. Women work as well as husbands. Children get scholarships separate from their parents. And those cultural things transform the family. So as we talked about, the modern family, or let's say the contemporary family, In a restaurant, they're all using their iPhones, and so, I mean, it's an amazing, extreme, I mean, if you told that to people from Naples 20, 30 years ago, you know, they're not just going to sit in your kitchen and eat your pasta and be friendly. They're all going to have their little iPhones. No, never. That could never happen in Italy. Okay, it's happening in Italy too. Okay. So we have market individualism. We have individualism in social arrangements like civic groups, the decline of traditional organized groups. We have cultural pluralism within the cultural arena. That is, not just punk, not just hip-hop, not just gospel, but people combine musical styles. So Elvis Presley did a series of recordings that were gospel. That is, he learned by singing what's normally called African American gospel music, and there's a whole bunch of his recordings. He did that before he developed his whole style of rock and roll. Okay. So the point is, cultural pluralism is, well, I mean, that goes back. But the Chicago Symphony did a survey and asked, what's of its subscribers, what kind of music do you most frequently listen to on the radio? And what did they answer? Number one? Rock. It's called omnivore. All right, that's a cultural pluralism. You combine things in new ways. And if you try to listen now and just say define rock or define hip-hop, they're combining elements from different musical styles. Okay. Which countries had the largest increases? So I showed you earlier the Netherlands and the U.S., but they're not alone. Korea, Canada, Belgium, etc., are all growing in substantial. Italy, so forth. But age is especially important. It's the young people who are particularly active in building these new arts organizations. Here are the names of some of them. This is pretty small. I'll expand it for a second here. Just so you can see some of these things that are growing the most. Live theater, performing arts promoters, independent artists, dance companies, musical groups. These are all on the rise. Museums, horse race tracks are in decline, and some of these other things are declining from the past. Movies are down. Professional tapes, zoos and botanical gardens are down, and amusement arcades are down. So the old playland around New York and so forth, these kinds of things are changing from the past. People are doing more electronically, more choice on their own as youth, individual young people, rather than staying with your family and going to a zoo. Okay. Look at the total number of employees in the U.S. in the whole leisure and hospitality sector. Do you see business cycles up and down? No. This is not a business cycle change. This is a sectoral change. This whole sector is on the rise. By contrast, what's going down? Manufacturing. Traditional manufacturing. People are not digging ditches anymore. They're not done assembly lines. Computers have replaced a lot of that. We still have cars. We still have electronics. But they're done in a much more technologically advanced way. And more people are trying to figure out not how to build the iPod. They're trying to say, what can we play on it? How can we have better songs? I want to write, I mean, my neighborhood of Bronzeville, you're a star if you're a basketball player, or you can write a better rap song and record it on YouTube and maybe insult the guys in the next game. That's what they do to be cool. All right, this is another important one. Flag, okay. This is the core idea of the city as an entertainment machine, which says, do we have to have a conflict between 19th century economics, where the classic I put this already on the board twice, this is the third time. These classic factors generate economic growth, and then after you have new jobs, new factories, then the people come to the job. That's the old People leave the rural parts of China. They come to Beijing, they come to Shanghai because the jobs are there. That's the old model. The next model is more talent, more highly educated people. They drive more economic growth because they have more smarts. They have new ways of combining cash and buildings in new ways. This is Gary Becker, this is Alfred Marshall, we don't deny either one or two, but we add three. That the local amenities like Lollapalooza, and you're making your choices, all the things that say, I want to be in New York, Chicago, or LA, rather than North Dakota, these amenities lead you are the human capital, but these amenities say to you, I'm willing to pay $50,000 to be in one of these three cities rather than in North Dakota. So, and the point is, you're not unique. There are many other people who are saying the same thing, and therefore, the value of housing is going up. You have to pay more and more rent to live in New York, or Paris, or Tokyo, or London. It's getting more and more expensive to live, but because more and more people want to be there, and they're voting the same way as you did, they get paid less. This is a classic Chicago economics paradoxical, if you will, ironic finding that because people want to be there more, it's not as if the cities get, that is, the cities may get richer in terms of some dimensions, but because the movable, rapidly movable young people especially, who can say, I can go wherever I want, they also can be, as you voted, they get paid less in the amenities, in the areas where rent may go up, but so do the amenities go up, but the cash salary, the fees, or the temp, that is, many of you, when you will be working on temp jobs, the temp jobs are paid less. Yes?
So with Chicago specifically, I know that you always mention like 3 Mile downtown district as thriving. But what about like the outside of the core, like maybe like Calumet or those areas down there, like U.S. Steel has gone out and there's no more trains down there and there's no more fisheries.
That's the 19th century is dead. Absolutely.
Is there a future with those areas?
Detroit is being, there's one guy who did a 240-page BA thesis with me on Detroit and how the downtown of Detroit is being totally renovated by artists. There are artists from China, Germany, who are going to Detroit who get dirt cheap houses. They can't get any, I mean, if you get robbed, there are no police. If your house burns down, there are no firemen, but it's cheap. And you can do anything you want. You can paint it blue, you can have stripes on it, which you can't do because of zoning in New York, Chicago, or LA. So there are, so the immediate area, to answer your specific question, I mean, bike around the area. There will be a bike tour of that area put on by my two colleagues, who we biked with a week or so ago. We bike all the way down in that area. And I mean, I bike through there regularly, and we can tell good stories about some of the dynamics. But one thing which happened, I think, 2 weeks ago, was one of the biggest entrepreneurial banks in Spain bought a massive amount of the land for building local housing. And so it's a very entrepreneurial Spanish bank. They buy a lot of stuff, you know, in the Spanish coast for tourists and so forth. They want to invest there. Plus, I mean, there's a lot of it has been torn down to prepare for something like this, but the point is, it's happening. So how much it will grow? I mean, I mean, there are a lot of other factors. There are competing neighborhoods. I'm on a committee right now, as I mentioned, with